Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Virginia Trioli. Answering your questions tonight, Shahzad Akbar, who's visiting Monash University to talk about his legal challenge to America's military drone program. Liberal Party rising star and member for Kooyong, Josh Frydenberg. Actor and comedian Magda Szubanski. The former head of Prime Minister and Cabinet, now Chancellor of the University of Western Sydney, Peter Shergold. And the Minister for Employment, Participation and Childcare, Kate Ellis. Please welcome our panel. Now, as usual, we're being simulcast on ABC News 24 and News Radio, and you can join the Twitter conversation with the hashtag Quanda on your screen now. Now, our first question tonight comes from Sarah Burgess.
Can you please put Australia out of its misery and let us all know when the next election will take place? I have a school formal to plan and people have gay weddings to plan.
Kate Ellis, end the misery now.
Well, unfortunately, Virginia, I don't get to call the election date. Of course, the Prime Minister does that. And what we do know is that whether it's in days, weeks or months, you're going to have a fantastic school formal and we're all looking forward to the speculation ending. But I'm not the person that can do that for you. You'll have to stay tuned for Prime Minister Rudd. So
what's the theory behind all this waiting game? The longer you leave the gap since Prime Minister Kevin Rudd came back, the longer you leave that period of bloodletting and misery within the Labor Party behind you and people perhaps forget?
Well, shockingly, I don't believe that is the theory, Virginia. I think the theory is actually that we don't have fixed-term elections in Australia. I wish we did, but we don't. We have 3-year terms. It is up to the Prime Minister to call the election date, and that is the process we've always followed. There is absolutely nothing different about it this time, except, of course, that Tony Abbott's been calling for another election since a few days after the last one. We'll know the election date in due course and we all look forward to that.
Josh Frydenberg, how are you handling the waiting game?
Well, I think pretty well, but we would like the election sooner than later. As they say, that Kevin Rudd loves to travel and there's a big meeting coming up at the G20 in St Petersburg on the 5th and 6th of September. No doubt you can't get in the middle of Kevin and an international trip, so I think you'll probably want to be there. And Australia's also going to be president in September of the UN Security Council. And so that's a 1-month stint that we have as part of our 2-year rotation on the UN. So I think you'd also want to go there. So I think we'll probably have to wait till late September.
You need it now, though, because you can't afford for the polls to go any further south for your side.
Well, depending on which poll you believe, but I think...
they're all drawing level.
Well, it's always going to be close, though, Virginia. I mean, history...
Oh, it was miles off being level.
Yeah, there wasn't much love for Julia Gillard, and that's true, but this election was always going to be close. What Australians don't want, though, is another hung parliament. I think they have been taken aback by the parliament in the last few years, and they do want a clear result. So we believe that the Australian people have waited long enough. There's a lot of business to do, particularly around the economy and national security as well. So bring it on, we say.
And Tony Abbott would never do that. He'd never delay it or fudge around with it at all for political gain.
Well, we're in opposition, Magda. So
Yeah, exactly.
Magda, is the waiting game getting in the way of any gay marriages being planned?
It's immaterial to me because I'm not planning a wedding because I'm not allowed to get married. So, but I was going to say, with the whole thing of St Petersburg coming up, is Kevin Rudd going to say anything? Because, as a lot of people will be aware, there has been a quite shocking sort of swing towards from Putin and the Duma recently against LGBTI rights, and I'm wondering if anyone's going to bother to say anything at that with that opportunity.
I guess you would never have the inside knowledge on that, Kate?
Well, I think whether it's on that occasion or on any other occasion, we always need to be speaking out against human rights abuses. We have seen some shocking examples coming from Russia in recent times in particular.
Yeah.
And I think that through our channels, through our diplomatic channels, we should always be pushing those messages. So whether or not it's connected to the meeting in St Petersburg in early September or not, I think that we need to make clear that Australia will be leaders and we will stand up and call out these kind of travesties when they occur.
And just maybe get gay marriage across the line to lead by example, I would suggest might be a way of doing it.
Just returning to the question,
Sorry.
Peter Shergold, you've been down this path before, of course, being head of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Can you intuit what the Prime Minister's strategy might be at the moment, if you were to speculate?
I think the major strategy is to keep us all guessing. I think that's the key. Of course, if you're a public servant, this is very exciting days indeed, waiting for the caretaker convention to come, when for 4 to 6 weeks,
servants are thrilled by such interesting things.
the country is in good hands, the public service. And you notice nobody notices the difference.
So what are you arguing for here, Peter Shergold? Rule by public servants?
I think it is important, actually, that public servants do recognise what their role is. It is the role of government to set the national interest. It is the role of public servants to give advice on that and then to implement the policies of the government of the day, whichever it is.
Shahzad Akbar, this waiting for Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's call election must be driving everyone crazy in Pakistan, is it? all you think of, I guess.
I have to say I understand the question, because I come from a place where we always run this uncertainty, and there is something added to that sometimes it's not the new Prime Minister, it's the military which takes over. So I think I really understand this question.
We have it lucky.
You are lucky.
It really puts a
You are
perspective
lucky.
on things, doesn't it? Yeah.
OK, so on that basis, we should stop complaining. Yeah, OK. Our next question tonight comes from Richard Teo.
So, given the factual events leading up to Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's current administration, such as a continuous stream of budget deficits under his first government, an ever-increasing national debt, the tragedy of lives lost during the Pink Badge program, and the destabilization of the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard's government, can anyone from the panel logically explain in some way, please, in regards to the undeniable popularity of Prime Minister Rudd amongst a significant portion of the electorate still?
Why is he so popular? Magda, do you have any insight into this?
No, I don't. Look,
Well, you do know something about star power.
I do know something about.
He clearly, to a lot of people, has some kind of star power.
Well, I'll tell you what I do know from the inside of star power is that no faith or trust should really be placed in it, and no one. It's very easy, I think, and I'm not speaking in reference to Kevin Rudd in this regard, but I think there's a very interesting thing that happens that you'll hear from politicians. They know amongst themselves often who the good guys are, and the sad fact is I've seen with other celebrities, and we all know who the good guys are too, and there are some people who will get a reputation amongst the public, they're beloved, and behind the scenes people are going, they're not good people, and I think. So I suppose what I'm saying in the long run is that there has to be some kind of a sense of good character that is divorced from popularity. As to why Kevin Rudd is so popular, the theory is because he's kind of an outsider. Is he the Sharon Strzelecki of politics? I don't know. He does.
Only you can answer that,
I don't
Magda.
know. Look, I tell you, I don't know. He has a bit of a pudding bowl haircut, but he is. And I could see him in a bib, to be perfectly honest, and a skirt. But he does have a very clunky style. You know when he does that counting thing? I don't know.
Got a zip.
Yeah, got a zip.
But all of this clearly works with some people.
Yeah, I find the affected sort of like mates, and when he said the royal barb, I just was dying a bit inside. But, you know, it will always be a mystery as to why anyone's popular, I think.
Kat Ellis, can you see it? Why so many love him?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, in response to the question, I'd say I think there have been some remarkable achievements in terms of the strength of our economy, the low unemployment rate, significant reforms, disability care, school funding, pricing carbon. But on top of all of that, in terms of policy achievements, I don't think there's any doubt that when I'm out in my local community in Adelaide, people are sick and tired of negativity and bickering, and people really want a positive plan for the future. And I think the fact that Kevin Rudd has been able to come out and articulate the plans for the future and to move past point scoring and blame laying and actually get on with the job, people have responded to incredibly positively.
But this is a question about his, as the questioner asks, undeniable popularity, about why people like him so much and like him so consistently. I mean, you don't like him. You're on the record as expressing your disgust at some of the ways that he's behaved about Julia Gillard and things that he said.
I would absolutely say that, of course, We have been through some incredibly hard times in recent times in the Labor Party, and nobody likes internal division and the like. But I will tell you that I like Kevin Rudd so much that I will do absolutely everything in my power to make sure that he's Prime Minister the day after the election, and that Tony Abbott and his negativity and lack of policies does not get anywhere near the lodge.
He does seem to have a feel for taking the temperature of the country, and then he's clearly extremely intelligent, and he does have some sort of a verbal, absolute communication skill, I think. He's very adept at that, I will say, would be my observation.
Peter Sugar, what do you see? I mean, you worked for John Howard, who in his earlier years was, really seen as electoral poison, as someone who could never get elected in his early days as leader of the opposition. Headlines with, why does this man still bother? And yet he went on to become a formidable Prime Minister and one of the most popular we've ever had, elected and re-elected again and again. So is there this thing called political star power that you can see in some and not in others?
I'm certain there is. So let's remember, I also worked for 4 months for Kevin Rudd when he was first Prime Minister during the transition.
Yes.
I think, obviously, if you're a senior public servant, you tend to see your minister or your Prime Minister sort of warts and all from the inside, as they do of yourself. I would have to say that when I think back through 20 years in the public service and the range of different ministers and prime ministers that I had the opportunity to work for, I never met, even in private, anyone who didn't actually want to make a difference. I mean, they were actually driven by a desire, all of them, to try and make positive public policy decisions.
Are they also driven by a sense of manifest destiny, that this is somehow their right?
I suspect that if you are in government, you would have to think that it is your role, individually and collectively, to set the national interest. That's what you're there for in a democracy.
But is there something about Kevin Rudd that is ineffably charming?
I don't know. I mean, because it's different from seeing someone on the inside and getting on well with them. It's a different matter about, well, how does their public image come across? And I must say, being a public servant in Canberra probably isn't the best place to judge that. It is difficult to understand what makes popularity. I think at the end of the day, it isn't about charisma. It is probably about people seeing that there is genuine leadership. And often, whether you agree with the policies or not, an admiration that someone does seem to have a clear strategy.
Josh Frydenberg, can you explain why Kevin Rudd is so liked?
Well, firstly, there's no difference between Kevin Rudd Mark I and Kevin Rudd Mark II. I mean, for the same reasons that Julia Gillard said that a government had lost its way, those reasons have not changed, namely the tax burden, namely the budget deficits, namely the border protection chaos. In terms of the celebrity of Kevin Rudd, I think it's quite dangerous, because what it is it's obscuring the real debate on important issues. So, for example, the day that he tweeted that photo of cutting himself shaving was the day that our unemployment numbers came out. And unemployment rose to 5.7%, more than 6% in Queensland, more than 8% in Tasmania. But we didn't have a debate about that. I mean, youth unemployment, an area in Kate's area, has hit the highest level in 15 years. This is the problem. This is the problem. We need to have a debate about the policy issues and not about Kevin Rudd cutting himself shaving.
Actually, sorry.
But Tony Abbott doesn't seem to be able to touch that popularity, and that's really the issue for you, isn't it? I mean, whether you like the fact whether Kevin Rudd is popular or not, you need a leader who's either equally or more popular, and he can't hit that mark.
Well, we actually don't, because that rating is not going to determine the election outcome. If you go back to 1996, when John Howard won a thumping majority of Virginia, he was less popular in the preferred PM stakes with Paul Keating. He ended up winning 4 elections and governing for nearly 12 years. That's the reality check. People want a leader, they don't want a celebrity in the lodge.
But I do actually have a theory. Now I'm hearing this, I'm thinking the reason why Kevin Rudd's so popular is Tony Abbott. A lot of what happens, you say, John Howard, what were the choices? You look at it and you go, oh my God, these are the options. And you go, well, that's better. But sometimes to suggest that someone has this mandate or is reinforced in this way, or do we know that they're that massively popular, or just that they are preferred to what the other option is?
Well, but that's the system that we have. I mean, and in the polls we look at the issue of preferred Prime Minister. And when you look at those poll figures, what's the latest one that we've got? Kevin Rudd, 51% preferred Prime Minister compared to Tony Abbott, 35%. Now, on that basis, and given that we clearly will have an election called very soon, is it still going to be the coalition's view that you stick with Tony Abbott? In your view, it's not a reason to jump to someone like Malcolm Turnbull?
Absolutely not. Well, firstly, we're really lucky to have Malcolm in the team. I mean, he's an outstanding individual and he's going to have a huge job in cleaning up the NBN mess. But as for Tony, he's led us in a united way. I mean, this is someone who spent nearly 20 years in public life. You don't know about his story with Indigenous, trying to help Indigenous communities. You don't know about his stories about raising money for women's shelters. You don't know about his story for raising money for the Paralympians. This is the stuff that he does
Why don't we know
quietly.
those stories?
Well, we're putting it out there, but at the end of the day, he gets on with doing his job. Now, not everyone's going to prefer that to seeing a tweeted photo of someone cutting themselves shaving, but that's the reality of it.
Shahzad Akbar, have you had an opportunity to watch Kevin Rudd and understand what we're talking about here when it comes to the popularity of this man?
I just saw his picture today in the papers when he was visiting the troops in Afghanistan. And I can see some parallels here. It's maybe one reason he's so popular, that other one is not that popular at all. I mean, we just had recent elections in Pakistan where Imran Khan, the former cricketer, which I think everyone might know in Australia, he turned out to be the most popular politician in Pakistan, and one reason for that was not his playing cricket and skills. I think that was the former government and Asif Zardari and his corruption. So that's why I think maybe.
What did you make of that quick trip to Afghanistan that Kevin Rudd embarked on?
Well, to be very honest, I think it was just preparing for the new elections that you trying to show that you are. It's not about, I think we're getting away from the real debate that have Australia and actually Pakistan is also an ally straight in war against terror. Have we been successful in the last 10 years? And this is exactly what we are trying to do in our work, working around drone strikes as well, that if we've been able to secure Afghanistan, a safe Afghanistan, for future time to come when American forces and allied forces are withdrawing from Afghanistan. And I think we are heading towards a very troubled time because we haven't been really successful, and that's the real debate which no one is talking about, and everyone is preparing for forces to come back home.
Let's move along now. Our next question comes from Helen McAdam.
This is for Peter Shergold mainly. The federal opposition has publicly stated that it will no longer trust the economic statement issued by the Treasury. How dangerous is the increasing politicisation of public service agencies to their impartiality and value? And what bipartisan rules of engagement can be employed to ensure that staff in those agencies are able to provide frank and fearless advice without fear of reproach or reprisal?
Well, I think it's very important and an absolute foundation of our political system that you have a public service that is able to serve successive governments, successive prime ministers with equal commitment. That's really what we are dependent on. I do not easily accept the suggestion that the Australian public service has become politicised. In fact, everything I see suggests that is generally not the case, that it does provide frank, fearless, robust policy advice to the ministers and the prime ministers it serves. The difficulty, of course, is it's done in confidence, so you don't usually see it. You don't know what policy advice has been given, what has been accepted and what has not. It's equally important that you have an Australian public service that realises that its role is to implement the policies of the government of the day. I sometimes get a little bit frustrated when someone says, oh, this is a really elegant policy. Oh, give me a break. You know, it's only elegant if it's delivered well. I mean, policy can only be judged by the way it is delivered. So it seems to me that the public servants have two key roles in this apolitical environment. One is to give the frank and fearless advice, and the other, when the decision is made, to implement what the government wants on time, on budget, and in fact to the government's expectations. That's why when I was in Prime Minister and Cabinet, one of the things I did was set up a Cabinet implementation unit so you could actually monitor the extent to which policies were actually being delivered as proposed. Because my sense is that it's better for a government not to have a policy at all than to announce a policy, get the announcement effect, but 6 or 12 months later find out that you haven't delivered because you'll be judged against the policy that you announced.
How helpful do you think it is to make a comment like we heard this week from Joe Hockey that he didn't trust those figures that were coming out, that every figure that came out recently had been wrong? What do you think of that as a public servant?
Well, I think he was saying that the figures were wrong. I didn't actually hear him saying you can't rely on Treasury. The fact is, when the economy is going well, Treasury figures, and I saw this during the Howard years, Treasury figures tended to underestimate how positive the economy was, tended to underestimate the revenues that are coming in. What we're now seeing is the reverse. With economic volatility and downturn, they tend to consistently being overestimating what the revenues are. I don't think that's anything to do with the politicisation of Treasury, not at all.
What do you think, Josh Frydenberg?
Well, our Barney's not with Treasury. I mean, Treasury served Australia extremely well since 1901.
So you don't believe it's been politicised?
No, it hasn't been politicised, but our concern is specific here. We've had 8 downgrades in less than 4 years. So on things like business investment, commodity prices, economic growth, the government has always chosen at the top end of the forecast to help their budget. And so if they put out an economic statement in this coming week, and then you have an election a few weeks after that, Treasury will feel bound to follow those forecasts that came out in the government's economic statement. And that's what our issue is. Now, we're using the Parliamentary Budget Office. We've submitted lots and lots of policies there for costings. We'll use other sources. But we have a real issue, given the track record of the government. It's the government of getting wrong all these predictions, that we have to do something about it.
But this comes in the context of an observation that was also made in the last few days, Josh Frydenberg, by your opposition finance spokesman, Andrew Robb, who likened Australia's AAA credit rating to the AAA credit rating that had been given to Lehman Brothers, and saying, I remind you, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which started the global financial crisis on that very day, they still had a AAA credit rating. So what does that credit rating really amount to? That's not the sort of conversation that we normally hear held about the nature of Australia's economy and its status, is it?
Well, I think we're verbling Andrew Robb, to be fair.
No, that's a direct quote.
But the issue here is that credit ratings are important because that goes to the cost of capital, the cost of paying for your debt.
So we should believe them when they're given.
Well, we should think that they are important. That's certainly my view.
So if you got a AAA credit rating, that would be believable? Or not?
Well, I'm saying we got a AAA credit rating when we were in government. Now,
but is the standard itself believable or not?
Well, before Lehman Brothers, Andrew Robb is absolutely right. There was a AAA credit rating and that collapsed. Now, there's been improvements to the system
all right. So you're not. So you're not saying that the AAA that credit system is valid or not? Well, believable, trustworthy?
Well, I'm saying that a AAA credit rating is important for Australia and is believable.
And we have one.
And we have one. But we had it under our government. In fact, we got it, there was 2 downgrades under the Hawke-Keating governments. They came up under the coalition. And so that's the reality. The AAA credit ratings are important.
OK, they're important and they are to be believed.
Yeah, sure.
OK. Kate Ellis, can I get you to respond to that question?
Look, I just think that this is an absolute example of the risk and the economic irresponsibility of the Tony Abbott coalition. I mean, I really believe that, and it's a huge slur on the public service, no matter what Josh says, it is absolutely a slur to say that their independent figures cannot be trusted. But more so, I really believe that the people of Australia, no matter who they want to vote for, no matter what side of politics, people don't want surprises after an election date. That is exactly why Peter Costello introduced this, so that we could have fully costed, independently costed policies, and that we could know the level of savings that we needed to find and release the detail of that, so that the Australian public know exactly what they're getting. Now, that's what we are committed to doing, and that is what they are shying away from doing and desperately looking for excuses to get away from having to tell the Australian public just exactly what they're going to cut.
Can I just say, Virginia, we will never shy away from our economic record. Out of the 12 budgets that Peter Costello and John Howard delivered, 10 of them were surpluses.
I'm talking about the future, Josh,
Kate, out of your last 12 budgets, All 12 have been in, well, there was 12 that have been in deficit. 5 were before the Rudd-Gillard period, 5 during the Rudd-Gillard period, and you've promised the next 2 to be in budget deficit. So 12 out of 12 deficits for you, 10 out of 12 surpluses for us. That's a pretty big contrast.
Well, I would say if you were that confident, if you were really that confident, then you wouldn't be running away from independent costing and from the very system that the government that you're holding up as delivering all of these surpluses is the same government that introduced the Charter of Budget Honesty, which Joe Hockey, yourself and Tony Abbott are running away from right now.
Let's move on, and you're watching Q&A, where the audience, of course, asks the questions. Our next question tonight comes from Mike Tucker.
Mr Akbar, as a human rights lawyer, you clearly understand the right to life is the essential right of all people, and that appears to be the basis of your suit against the United States for its use of drone attacks. What about the rights of the American people, the British people and other countries' people? Pakistan has banned at least 40 terrorist organisations. But the United States regularly finds known terrorists living in Pakistan. Would it be true to say that if Pakistan acted against these terrorists, the drone attacks would not be necessary?
I think I'm really glad that you asked this question, because we are often misunderstood when we talk about challenges to drone strikes in Pakistan, because the challenges to drone strikes in Pakistan are on basis of legality of drone strikes in Pakistan. There is no denying the existence of militants and hardcore elements within Pakistan or in Afghanistan, and Pakistan has been a frontline ally on war on terror for the last 10 years since 9/11, and Pakistan has lost more than 60,000 of its people on this war, which were people who have been killed in suicide attacks or people who have been killed in fighting this war, including Pakistani military. But having said that, drone strikes are an issue here, because drone strikes are illegal strikes carried out in Pakistan in complete secrecy. And that's what's wrong with drone strikes. There is no accountability involved. There's no process involved. It's the CIA which is carrying out the process. They are under no control, no congressional oversight. And that's where the problem lies. More than 3,500 people have been killed, and these are unnamed people. I think people in Pakistan would really appreciate if CIA could name these people who have been killed. But I must tell you that according to the new survey, which has come out after Peshawar High Court, which is a high court in Pakistan, their investigation on ground, and also an investigation by a UK-based independent Bureau of Investigative Journalism, according to both reports, more than 30 civilians are killed for one militant target, and most of the time that person is also missed. So the question here is that the system or the illegality involved is one big issue, and then also there is no transparency. So that is what the problem is.
Shahzad Akbar, though, to get to the essence of the question, if Pakistan took care of this issue itself, if it was more focused on terrorist training and terrorists within Pakistan and the like, then there wouldn't necessarily be the need for the United States to come flying in over the top.
Certainly. I think this is where also the Western world is misinformed to some extent, that the specific area which is now being targeted by US is the area of North Waziristan Agency, which is a tribal region.
Yep.
Total population of that area is 450,000 people. Presence of Pakistani military, which Pakistan has just disclosed to the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, is 100,000 standing army in that area. So I'm sure if US give evidence of presence of any militant group at a specific target place where they're being targeted, I'm sure there's a law enforcement mechanism which can be brought into play. I think it's the distrust between the partners which is happening in shape of drone strikes, but that shouldn't be the reason of killing people illegally without the due process.
As a foreign policy specialist, Josh Frydenberg, does this program and Australia's connection and the intelligence that we might provide to the US in particular, does that cause you concern?
Well, I don't know what intelligence Australia provides because I'm in the opposition, and I acknowledge Shahzad's expertise in this area, but I find it really interesting that President Obama, who was a liberal law professor, and he campaigned against the war and campaigned for the closure of Guantanamo Bay, since coming into office has been such an emphatic user of drones. And I can only get one conclusion out of that, Virginia, which is he's seen the threat that Al-Qaeda poses. I mean, Australia's been subject to that with Jamar Islamiyah and the Bali bombings in 2002. You had the Madrid bombings in 2004. You had the London bombings in 2005. You had Mumbai in 2008. There's a clear and present threat. And that's why these drone strikes have been carried out by President Obama. And they've actually taken out major high-value targets, like the number 2 from Al-Qaeda, the number 3 from Al-Qaeda, the guy who was responsible for the embassy bombings in Tanzania and also in Kenya, the US embassy bombings. Those guys have been taken out by these drone attacks. So I understand the difficulties on it, but I look at President Obama and his emphatic use of it, and I can only reach the conclusion that he's seen the threat that is posed by Al-Qaeda.
Well, what does the rest of the panel think about that? Peter Shergold, I mean, we know that the numbers of civilians killed in relation to those identified and then later identifiable targets killed is way out of whack, 30 sometimes per kill. Are you comfortable with that?
No, I don't think anybody can be comfortable with that. And it's one of these situations is where there is, in a sense, no first best solution. You've only got least worst solutions. And I must say on this, I'm with Josh. I mean, it is interesting to, I have no idea what is the information or the intelligence that President Obama is getting, and I am horrified the fact that a lot of innocent people clearly do get killed. Against that, at least if you believe what is said, and I do, some of the top leadership is being actually taken out through this process.
I want to come back to Shazad Akbar in a moment, but Kate Ellis, your response?
Well, look, I guess I'd say, to be really honest, none of us here on the panel have the information that is being put before the decision makers when they weigh up the risks and the opportunities and the strategy around each of these operations. We just don't have that. What we do know, of course, is that it is a tragedy when we lose innocent lives. But of course, those people that are making the decisions, that are calling the shots on this, are looking at the terrorists, are looking at the people that have been identified, and are weighing up those. And that is a really hard decision for anyone to make. And of course, it's also true that everybody would love to say that there are never any innocent casualties in war. That's not the reality of war now or at any time throughout the ages, and it's not likely to be.
I think the issue that Shazad Akbar raises is that if you're not in a declared war with a combatant, then that actually raises the legal problems with it. And I will come back to you, but quickly, Magda, do you want to say something on that?
Isn't also the issue, isn't it considered that Al-Qaeda is what they call a shallow organisation, meaning that it's not really leader dependent? So if you're how effective is it to target the leaders anyway? You're killing 30 extra people. Yes, you're getting the leader, but are you actually dismantling the organisation? Because someone will just pop up and replace them anyway.
I think this is exactly what the problem here is, that there's no doubt that more than around 50 Al-Qaeda top leaders have been killed in drone strikes in Pakistan. But what has happened in reality? Someone else has replaced them. One very notorious terrorist in Pakistan was killed in drone strike in 2009, but now he's been replaced by even a fierce person. So it's not really solving the issue. The problem here is not killing those 50 people who have been killed in this manner. I think the problem lies with other people whose number is very high, and that's where the problem lies, because I think what all of us have said here is that none of us has the information. But the problem here is Congress doesn't have the information. Pakistani Parliament doesn't have the information. No one who should be involved in this process has the information, even post-strike. I'm not talking giving the information before the strike, but post-strike there is no information given and there is no accountability of that. And there is no way for us knowing that how, when US does not have any troops on ground, doesn't have any intelligence on ground, how they are gathering intelligence for an area which is completely landlocked. No one can go in and come out, but still you have intelligence, you're targeting people. And then we hear about signature strikes, which are basically a drone pilot is looking at the monitor and studying pattern of someone, how that person is behaving, and there's a certain behavior which is prescribed good to be killed for.
Okay. We're going to move on. Let's take our next question now, and it comes from Alice Lamb.
This is a question for Peter, Josh and Kate. Should governments be investing more in Aboriginal economic development as a way of addressing Indigenous disadvantage? And what's the most effective way for governments to make that investment?
Peter Shergold, let's start with you.
Well, yes, government should be investing more in Aboriginal economic development, but it's equally important they start to invest in different ways. My frustration, which I was very open with a few weeks ago, was that when I look back on my time in the public service, and I was at one time the CEO of ATSIC, it is just so frustrating that you had successive governments and successive ministers with public servants doing what they thought were things for the best of reasons and having the worst of outcomes. And I have then since reflected on, well, what is going on? What are the mistakes? What are the failure? And it's important to me because I don't think what we see in the Aboriginal community is just in the Aboriginal community. There's a problem here more generally with now second and third generation welfare dependence, and how can this be? You see, what I've seen in Aboriginal affairs is that you provide payments, concessions, subsidies to people, and it gives you a pretty poor minimum life standard, but effectively is passive welfare. Or you deliver a range of services which are frankly usually second rate, housing, education, training, which tend to be go round in circles training, they don't really lead anywhere. That what we have failed to do is actually work with Aboriginal communities and give them both the right and the responsibility to have greater control themselves over how they use the funds that are available to them. Okay, and I think this is a more general thing. I mean, what we've got at the moment is if you treat people as beneficiaries, if you treat them as recipients, if you treat them as cases to be managed, what do? What we've seen over and over is we create learned helplessness. We create the dependence. And we see that in particular, but not exclusively in Aboriginal communities. So the more we can tailor our programs and give greater control to Aboriginal communities themselves through place-based funding, the better it's going to be.
So
and the more we can promote employment and those economic incentives.
But how do you do that then and avoid the problem which has sprung up in many communities when you have self-determination in that way and money going directly to the community, where you stop, say, one single powerful family from controlling that money or siphoning off that money? How do you put in place then clarity and governance and oversight to make sure that it's used and deployed effectively and correctly?
This is public funds. There's got to be public accountability. I'm not saying there shouldn't be public accountability. It's just that we allow the funds to be used in different ways. And yes, we have to invest and support capacity and capability in Aboriginal organisations. Absolutely. We have to check that the money is being used appropriately. But here's the thing, and we've seen it in areas like disability care and aged care. If you actually say to someone, here is a level of resources that you can use, people treat those resources as their own. I mean, what we know is people spend other people's money really badly, and particularly government money. If you instead say, actually, this is money you can use, for example, for Aboriginal economic development, then you've got the capacity that money starts to be used far more effectively.
Is there also a case, though, that, I'm not an expert, but I have a number of friends who work in this area, and they've told me that one of the issues that Aboriginal people have, first of all, it ain't one thing. There are so many diverse Indigenous communities, and to have one policy doesn't work. It is very, very diverse. But secondly, that they feel so jerked around that every time there's a new government, just when they've started to build up something, it gets changed and they don't know where they stand. So there's no continuity. And that for them means that they're never quite able to get up on their feet. Is that a contributing factor, do you think?
Yes, it is. And it is true that there isn't one policy. There are, so many different types of communities. Some have been there a long time. Some have been brought together in missionary days. Community can mean many things. But the fact is, what we've got to be able to do is tailor the government funding available to meet the needs of that particular community.
For instance, I know some Aboriginal people who hated the intervention and others who absolutely welcomed it. And you can't just have one solution, can you?
But we need a bipartisan approach on this. I mean,
and on asylum seekers, I would say.
Sure. But we need a policy that works.
I tell you what we need to do is, and I might not have the fixed view that people think, but we need to stop the disgusting rhetoric. I mean, no matter what your view is, people who are suffering should not be used as a football. That's appalling.
Joshua Frydenberg, I do very much want to hear from you on this issue of closing the gap. And I'm not being in any way glib when I say, are there some policies or some ideas in the opposition on your side of politics that you think might make a difference?
Well, firstly, the intervention, which was a coalition idea, and as you say, it split people's views. We thought
and was taken up then by the...
Exactly, and we thought it was really important because you had to tackle the alcoholism, you had to tackle the pornography, and you had to tackle the domestic violence. And you had to garnish wages and the like, or garnish welfare payments, so that money was spent on food. And, the job here is to get kids into school, which Noel Pearson has been pushing so much in Cape York, and to get parents into work. I pay credit to some of the government initiatives in this area. I mean, Kate's area in this program called Hippie, which is about getting mentors in for parents in Aboriginal communities so that they can look after their children better. That sort of program is a welcome one. Can I just say, Tony Abbott is genuine about this area, right? He's had a lifelong interest. He's promised as Prime Minister to spend 1 week in Indigenous communities, to take the policy out of a separate portfolio area into the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet under his watch. I think that will make a real difference. He's really genuine, and he's partnered with people like Noel Pearson and others who are real leaders in the field.
Yeah, I've spoken to him about that in the past. Kate Ellis, does the government believe there's a better or a different or a better way of delivering welfare?
Well, first of all, both Peter and Magda have talked about having different place-based approaches rather than just saying from Canberra, this is the way that it will work in every community. I'm really proud of some of the measures we've put in place in that regard, and just in the last few months we've introduced the new Remote Communities and Jobs program so that communities themselves can be empowered to come up with the solutions that work right in those areas. But the question was actually about, do we need to put in extra money? And I would say that, if you looked at money alone, that has not been an indicator of success in this area. Yeah. We have seen literally billions of dollars invested in trying to close the gap, and we have not seen the results that should accompany that. So I think money is obviously incredibly important, but what else is important is that we're actually measuring what we're achieving with those dollars. And that's why the Closing the Gap targets are so important. We outlined the targets of how we would actually achieve real results and are being measured against that each and every year. I'm really proud that this year we're meeting our first target in terms of raising the attendance rates at kindergarten and preschool of Indigenous children. And we're on track to meet the target that's been put in place about reducing child mortality in Indigenous communities. What I would say is I agree we need a bipartisan approach. I think having targets and each and every year letting the Australian public see what progress we've made towards meeting those targets is a really good thing. I note that Tony Abbott and the opposition have not committed to keeping those targets and working towards it. And I certainly hope that Josh would take that back and say that I think that's a really positive thing that we can do no matter who's in government. We can make sure that, yes, we're investing money, but we're getting the results that we need to see, and we're ending what is such an appalling shame right in our own country. We need results.
Can I just follow up also one thing Magda said, and I think it was spot on. The difficulty with often communities getting short-term funding. I think one of the things we have to move is from providing funding on the basis of need to funding on the basis of reward. That is to say, if we're serious about Aboriginal economic development, communities that do get government resources and use them well to increase school attendance, for example, to create job opportunities, should then be rewarded by a flow-on of that funding. What too often happens is if you're a community that starts to succeed, you end up being punished because it is judged that your need is less than another community. We've got to have it so that funding will continue into the future on the basis of performance.
Shahzad Akbar, on this subject, I understand that the tribal people of Pakistan are in a similarly disadvantaged position too.
Definitely. They have been actually kept on the periphery of Pakistan, that they are not part of the system and they've been left out and they haven't been given the due education or development which is given in rest of the country. And then now we turn out to them after 9/11 saying that you are not doing much. And actually now the question is about that, have we given them enough? Have we given them enough education, and have we given them other means which could bring them into the mainstream system? And now I think which everyone understands in Pakistan is that we need to work on, as I think Peter has been saying, that we need to actually look into getting them education and getting them all of the facilities and all of the benefits of being part of the civilized society. But that decision has to be taken in consultation with the community, and also with keeping in view that what would actually benefit them in the long term.
Can I just say one last?
Just very quickly, because time is on the wing. We need to move along.
The other thing I think that's always concerning is that Aboriginal and Indigenous people are portrayed as hopeless basket cases. And the limited amount of time that I've spent with Aboriginal people, I have been struck by their generosity, their wisdom, and the notion that we give to them and we tell them what to do. Yeah. There is so much that we would do well to learn from them as well. It's an exchange. It's a dialectic, it's a subtle, it has to be an integration, not an imposition, and it's subtle, it's sophisticated, it's complex, but yeah.
Well, it is time to move along. The next question comes from Christopher Witt.
Hi, how are you? Just on a bipartisan note, I'd like you each to think for just a moment, reflect back on when you were about 20 and that process of transitioning from a dependent child relationship into a productive adult relationship. And I think the fact of the matter is right now, we have worldwide, youth unemployment is really soaring, and this is really a concern to me. We also see among Australian youth and across the world, a great many are university educated, and yet they can't find work in their field of training. So, you know, years ago, there was the military as a stepping stone, a ladder, that got you in, and this was framed up as the national service. But the question is, what's the role today for national youth service in some way to create a ladder to give people, young people especially, to help groom those job skills and to help introduce citizenship? I mean, I find it really quite embarrassing that there's a national youth service plan in Pakistan.
Okay.
Every country, but not in Australia.
We've got your question, so let's get to it. Kate Ellis, you and Bill Shorten are looking at introducing some kind of, it's been described as youth boot camp for early school leavers. 70 million, as I understand it, out of training money to fund it. Why this program?
Well, obviously I can't comment on what may or may not be going before the Cabinet. What I can say is that I'm really proud that even at a time with the GFC, we've seen that we've had youth unemployment at a lower rate, at around 11% under our government than it was under the previous government. But that is not to say that I don't completely agree that we need to be looking to do more. My own personal view is that we shouldn't do that by punishing, we shouldn't do that by humiliating young people. We should do that by providing pathways and by linking them with training. And I think that there's a number of key ways that we can do that. We run the Youth Connections program. One program which I had the opportunity in my own electorate to open, it was a trades training centre this very week, seeing young people, rather than stepping in when young people fall out of the system, let's find ways to keep them in the system. And if you can start working towards your trade, your qualification while you're still at school, so you've got a head start so you can move straight into employment, I think that's an incredibly important program and one that I really, really would not like to see cut.
Okay, well, you won't speak directly to boot camp, but it's been in the papers. Josh Frydenberg, you might have read about it too. Bill Shorten involved in this. Is something like that needed in Australia?
Look, we'll have a look at it when it's announced, but I mean the point here is how can you get the economy to grow, to create jobs for all these young people? And in fact, for 15 to 19-year-olds who are out there looking for full-time work, we're at 15-year highs. It's more than 24%.
Well, that's actually because we're keeping them in school, Josh.
Right,
so let's just put the facts on the table.
There are actually people who have said that they're looking for full-time...
Because they're in school or training. They're 15-year-olds.
They're actually people who are saying they're looking for full-time work in the ABS. And that came out the day that Kevin put his tweeted photo of him cutting himself self-shaving. So maybe you missed
This photo really bothered you.
So maybe you missed it. But youth unemployment's a huge issue. I mean, that's one of the great problems with, you know, the fallout of the GFC. If you go to Spain and Italy and Ireland, it's up to 50%. Yeah. So how do we grow the economy to create these jobs? And if you look at the collapse in the manufacturing sector, if you look at the collapse in the small business sector, you know, we're seeing so many jobs go offshore. That's how we've got to get kids into employment. I mean, it's a nice pre-election announcement to talk about boot camp, but deal with the rising unemployment in this country with real policies.
All right, there's time for just one last question tonight, and it comes from Adam Barber.
I'm currently a law and arts. I'm currently in a law and arts degree at UWS. I have found that there are a lot of negative comments in regards to law and literature degrees. People say that law is an expensive and hard degree, and finding jobs is really hard, and that philosophy and literature don't give you the skills necessary for the workforce. As a university chancellor, what do you say about my prospects for seeking employment in the future?
Well, as an arts graduate, I can say your prospects are fantastic. It leads to a wonderful, wonderful job.
We were at the same uni. I did philosophy and art history, and I've sort of done all right.
We met in cinema studies class, do you believe it? So that's where it takes
How wanky.
Exactly. What can you do? You can't disown your history.
No.
What did you study, Peter Shergold?
Well,
come on.
I did humanities. I did political studies, American studies. I wrote a master's thesis on Edward Bellamy as a utopian economist, and I did a PhD on working class living standards in 1900. So I was very well prepared to be head of PM&C.
Public servant.
Which does lead me to my key point.
Yes.
Of course those sorts of degrees are worthwhile, because you learn how to research, you learn how to conceptualise, you learn how to synthesise, you learn how to tell a story, you now learn how to put arguments together. Of course those degrees are valuable, and I'm delighted you're doing it at the University of Western Sydney.
I think we should have declared a conflict of interest there myself. Kate Ellis, what did you study?
Well, my major was actually in history, and I remember at the time someone saying to me, "Are you going to be a historian?" I said, "No." "Are you going to write history books?" I said, "No." And I mean, the previous questioner said, "Think back to yourself as a 20-year-old," which I shuddered a little bit. I was a very idealistic 20-year-old, and I was of the view that if you study something that you love, it will lead to a career that you love. And if you are genuinely passionate about what you're doing, then I think that's a really good course to be on, and you should stay there.
Josh Frydenberg, you're only a politician because you didn't end up being Andre Agassi. That's a fair assertion, isn't it?
No, it's not, because my ambitions were much greater than my talents, I can tell you that.
But you hit the tour, didn't you?
I took a year off,
yep.
And I can boast I beat Mark Philippoussis in doubles, but, you know, that's not enough to make it. But, you know, going out and following your dream, whether it was mine in tennis and I clearly wasn't good enough, or whether it's, you know, doing a liberal arts degree or any other career, I think it's wonderful. I think we're blessed in this country to have such great universities, and the more people that study it, as far as I'm concerned, the better.
And you did a law degree as well, didn't you?
I did a law degree as well.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Doesn't end up too badly. Shahzad Akbar, what did you study?
Well, I studied law, but I can tell you that I studied international trade law, and I don't practice with money at all. So if you think that you were not justified in your education, you can sue your chancellor, you can sue your government for that.
Shahzad, are you offering representation here?
I don't have the right of audience here, but I'm sure that you can get...
I would be careful about this legal advice.
Yes, always get your own legal advice. That's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, won't you? Shahzad Akbar, Josh Frydenberg, Magda Szubanski, Peter Shergold and Kate Ellis. Now, next Monday, Tony Jones is back with the Parliamentary Secretary for Housing and Homelessness, Doug Cameron, the Shadow Minister of Climate Action and Environment, Greg Hunt, the Head of Al Jazeera English, Al Anstey, the founder of Youth Without Borders, Yasmin Abdel-Magid, and the Financial Review's Pamela Williams, whose book Killing Fairfax chronicles the decline of one of Australia's great media empires. I'll be back on News Breakfast from 6 a.m. this Wednesday. Have a great night.